Watch me build an electric guitar entirely out of cardboard. This is a real electric guitar that I will be modeling it after. So the first thing I did was cut up those cardboard boxes, then I traced out the body of the guitar, and I cut it out with an X-Acto knife, and this is what it looked like. Then I cut out almost the exact same piece but with a notch at the top where the neck will fit for the front of the guitar. Then I traced out the pick guard and I cut that out as well. And then I went to Michael's and picked out all of the paints that I wanted. And this is me cutting out the first piece of the neck. I did end up cutting out a couple of these and stacking them on top of each other to make it thicker. And then I cut out the pickups and I painted those silver and painted the pick guard white. And this is me tracing the head of the guitar and then cutting it out. And it did end up being too skinny. I don't know how that happened, so I freehanded one that was a little bigger, cut it out, and it was perfect. And I cut out a couple of those so that I could stack them on top of each other. And then this is me painting the first layer of purple on the back of the guitar. And this is me cutting out a piece for the back of the neck that was going to be curved because the back of the neck is curved. And here's me bending it and trying to make sure it would stay curved when I glued it down. So I glued it and it ended up working perfectly. This is what it looked like, nice and curved on the back. And then this is me gluing on the head of the guitar, which is pretty difficult because the head sits behind the neck. And here's me adding the second layer just to make it thicker, trimming it. And then I glued on the third layer of the head and bent it to the same shape, and it worked perfectly. And then this is me adding a strip to the body of the guitar to make it 3D. I didn't just want to cut out the same shape and glue those on top of each other because I thought this would look a lot neater and be easier, and it worked very well. And then I tried to glue the top of the guitar onto the back and it wasn't staying, so I flipped it over and tried to glue the back onto the front, and it ended up working. And then this is me cutting out a piece from the bottom of the back of the neck because it was a different shape. And then I cut out the little shapes that I was going to use to fill it in, and I glued those on because the back of it wasn't curved, it was more like a square. And this is me painting the first layer of purple onto the rest of the body. And then this is me painting brown onto the fretboard and the neck. Honestly, it barely made a difference. And then for the little metal part on the back, I measured it, cut it out, and then painted it silver. And here's me measuring out the bridge, and then I cut out the first piece for that and painted that silver as well. And then for the volume and tone controls, I ended up tracing around my chapstick because it was the exact right size. Then I cut those out. I glued them together. Honestly, if I did this again, I would try to make them be able to move, but they cannot move. Then I mapped out the frets, and I ended up using the string that I bought to use for the strings, but it was too skinny, so I glued those down two at a time to make it thicker. I trimmed them, and then I didn't like the little gap that was between the strings, so I just put some silver paint on there, and I think it ended up looking pretty good. And the fret markers on the original guitar were these rectangles, and I didn't like them, so I copied these circle ones on my acoustic guitar. So I mapped out where those were, I traced around this pencil, and then I painted all of them white. And then I glued down the nut on the top of the guitar, and then I painted that white as well. And then here's me painting the little black trim around the neck. You couldn't really see it, but I still did it. And here's me buying new string for the strings and this foam paper, a varnish, and these lollipops that I would use for a lot of things. And here's me gluing down the input jack, and then gluing that little metal piece on the back that I made earlier, and cutting out little circles on that foam piece to be the little screws on the metal piece. Then I cut out a bunch more circles to be the screws on the pick guard. I glued those on and painted them silver as well. And then for the little tuners, I cut out these little squares that would sit on the back, and then these ones that were a weird shape on the end. And I glued those down, painted them silver. And then for the little boxes that are holding the tuners, I built those, which took a very long time, and ended up with these. I cut out the round pieces on the top of the tuners and put them on top of the lollipop sticks that I painted silver. And as you see, these little boxes, the notch was on the side. I ended up having to move it so that the tuners would be able to turn. And so I cut it down the middle and moved that piece to the edge so that the notch was in the middle. See, it was on the side and now it's in the middle. And so this is kind of how I made them be able to turn. I put a thick band of glue around the stick so that you couldn't pull it out. Put some more cardboard for support. I glued it down and it was still able to turn, which I was so happy about. And then I painted them silver, and then I cut out these little cardboard circles to put on the front. And for the pickup selector, I really wanted it to be able to move, so I had to cut up the guitar that I already glued together and painted. And then I traced out where the hole was going to be on the pick guard, traced it out on the body of the guitar, and then cut out this little rectangle, which was very painful because I didn't want to ruin the whole thing. But I cut it out, and then I made this little model beforehand that you can see in the front of it being able to move, and so I just redid that with the real guitar. I used a piece of cardboard for that, and I really wish I had used a lollipop stick, even though it wouldn't have looked as accurate because it would have been way sturdier because it's very flimsy. But I glued it on and it still worked. Then I glued on the volume and tone controls that do not turn. And I made a little piece to go on top of that pickup selector, painted it white, and then I tried to wrap a little bit of packing tape around it to make it more sturdy, and it kind of worked. And then there's this pinstripe on the back of the guitar that I painted on mine, but I painted it white. And then for the bridge, I started constructing that. I added this little piece on the bottom, and then I tried to make it as accurate to the real one using those lollipop sticks and the foam board and cardboard, and then I wrapped some of that old string around it. And here's a close-up of me doing that. And then I painted the whole thing silver, and I think this thing is called the truss adjustment, don't know what it is, but I painted that. And then here's me trying to make those parts on the head that hold the strings. It was very tiny. I used a tiny piece of the lollipop and the foam paper, glued them on, cut out a little notch. And then here's me cutting out the little screws that will be on the pickups. And then I added a thick layer of glue to where the neck was going to sit because it ended up being too low. I wanted it to sit higher, and then I glued on the neck. I honestly think I glued it on a little bit crooked. I don't know if you can tell. And then the nut needed to be taller, so I glued on a foam piece on top of that, painted that white later, and I glued on the bridge and the pickups. And then here's me cutting out the tiny little screws that go next to the pickups. They were so small I could barely hold them. And then here is me cutting out the string retainer on the top of the head. This was also very small, but I glued it together, and then I glued it on the guitar and tried to make sure it was in the right place with the strings. And then I painted that silver as well. And then here's me painting the little black dots on the back of the tuners. And then I did the first coat of varnish over the whole guitar. I think I ended up doing about 3 coats over the whole thing. Then here's me measuring out some strings. I taped them down and painted them silver. I even tried this 2-hand technique, but it didn't work. And then I tried to turn them over and paint the back of them silver, but there were still bald spots. But then I gluing them on at the bridge first, and then stretching them out, gluing them to the nut, then wrapping them around that little part, and then gluing it in the middle. And here's a close-up of me doing that, trying to wrap this around the tiny little lollipop stick, and then glue it down, and then stretch it all the way to the top, and glue it down here, and then stretching it, here's with the string retainer for the last 2, then wrapping it around this part, and then gluing it in the middle, and then cutting it. And I think it ended up looking pretty good. And there were still some bald spots, so I painted over those, and this is what the final product looked like. I think it looks pretty good. Here's it compared to the original guitar, and then a close-up of those pickups and the bridge, and then the head of the guitar and my tuners that still move, which is probably my favorite part. And here is the back of the guitar compared to the original. And here's a little close-up of that pickup selector that still works. I'm pretty happy with it. This is the first time I've ever done this, but if I ever did another one, I would definitely do things differently in a different order. But yeah, here's what it looked like. Thanks for watching.